I'm really excited to introduce our board certified chaplain, Mr. Michael Eselun, who's been named the John Glaspie Chaplain in Oncology Care for the Simsman UCLA Center for Integrative Oncology. Everyone I've talked to from Simsman really highlights the fact that his work and leadership at the center has been a lifeline for patients and providers alike. I'm excited to welcome him today as he closes out our morning sessions. He's a two-time TEDx speaker and speaks extensively to audiences around the country. I really am excited to welcome you. Thank you, Mr. Eselun.
Thank you so much, Rashmi, for the nice introduction. Webster's first definition of heal is to make sound or whole. Can we really talk about healing in any meaningful way unless we're willing to talk about all of those components that comprise a person's wholeness? Certainly, physical and mental well-being are a big piece of that, but they're not the whole picture. Can we really call ourselves healers unless we're willing to attend to all of those aspects that comprise a person's identity, namely one's spirit? As the Dr. John Glaspie Chaplain in Oncology Care at the Simsman UCLA Center for Integrative Oncology, that's my job, that's my role. But the way I see it, it's not only my role. Every day I see doctors, nurses, social workers, psychologists, tending to spirit most beautifully and effectively, often from a different perspective or maybe with a slightly different vocabulary, but tending to spirit nevertheless. I also see those who don't. So what does it look like? Through my reflections and stories, I hope to paint a picture to show, not to tell exactly. I'll be sharing my own perspective as a chaplain, some of the common spiritual, theological themes that I see come up again and again from folks all over the belief spectrum. I'll be sharing some of the spiritual crises and challenges that reveal themselves, as well as some interventions that I have found to be useful. Ultimately, my hope and invitation is that I might empower each of you to perhaps view yourselves as one who tends to spirit as part of your artistry as healers. In the patient population that I serve at UCLA, I would say that the lion's share of patients identify as some flavor of spiritual but not religious. That would be consistent with how Americans tend to identify themselves these days, spiritually speaking. It's an ambiguous expression. It doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. So I will often ask, what do you mean by that, spiritual? Or they will ask me. For myself, I'd have to go back to the Latin root of the word, spiritus, which only means breath. So what is it that breathes life into your life? What is it that gives it meaning? What is it that makes you want to show up and fight for another day? Now, for some, that might mean a deep connection to a religious tradition or community or practice. For some, it might mean a more personal relationship to a higher power. For some, it might mean their family. It might mean their work, their dog, surfing, the perfect wave. For some, it might mean the place where they feel that connection to a power greater than themselves, maybe the seashore or a forest or the Thanksgiving dinner table. Whatever it is, a diagnosis of cancer can really mess with all of that. Because what used to feel meaningful yesterday, today feels meaningless, or I don't have access to it in quite the same way. So perhaps I have to find a new meaning, or at least a new pathway to connect to the old one. In a way, I see myself as a fellow traveler on that pathway, having those discussions, exploring those definitions of meaning, the old ones and the new, holding the space of calm, creating room to tend to spirit, however we might define it. That might be a good working definition for compassion itself. The Latin root of the word compati only means to be with suffering, to be with it, not to fix it or correct it or advise it or dismiss it. It's not a small or easy thing to walk beside suffering. One critical component for me in being able to do that is offering a deep, empathic, patient kind of listening. And here's the tricky part, listening without any agenda. Which stories a patient chooses to tell me, the rhythms she uses to tell them, her energy often reveal much about a spirit that may need as much tending as her physical body. They may also reveal how she sees her place in the world, what she finds to be true, where she finds meaning. And all of that is long before we ever talk about God or prayer, if we even ever do. Part of my toolbox in presenting that compassionate presence is also to cast myself as the student. The patient is the teacher. And with that humility, I'm the one who's learning what it's like to be them. I don't have cancer. It would seem arrogant, presumptuous of me to tell a patient how to feel, what to think, how to be through this. But the thing is, it's not only me who's getting taught. The patient is also teaching himself, reminding himself who he is, what he's connected to, what he's made of. One piece of authority that I will own is that of having been a witness to countless patients walking the cancer path. And with that authority, I can offer a kind of affirmation, legitimizing, if you will, an experience a patient might have. Almost daily, I hear patients say, does this make any sense to you? Have you ever heard anybody say this before? And when I can say, just last week, a gentleman said the exact same thing, it can be a soothing balm indeed, offering this slice of normalcy in a world turned upside down. We go through life, all of us, sometimes so certain of what we believe and hold to be true. We meet a crisis like cancer, suddenly all bets are off. I don't know what's true anymore. I've walked beside dozens of devout Catholics, Christian, who when faced with their own death will admit, I don't know what comes next. I've always believed in heaven, but you know what? I'm just not sure anymore. I don't think that's true. Likewise, I've walked beside plenty of secular folks who when faced with the finish line will admit, I can't quite accept this is the whole story. They will sometimes share with me mystical experiences they've had. They claim they've never shared with anyone. Perhaps they just didn't have a context in which to hold such an experience, or perhaps such an experience just didn't toe the secular party line. Sometimes faith systems remain whole, complete, solid, intact. Sometimes they collapse altogether. Sometimes they crack open just the teeniest bit, allowing room for an often disquieting visitor, doubt. That's an intersection I believe is worth exploring. The German-American theologian Paul Tillich says that the opposite of faith is not doubt, it's certainty. I sometimes wonder if experiencing grace on this walk through cancer hinges on our capacity to come to peace with uncertainty, with doubt. There are a handful of theological themes that I see come up from folks all over the belief map, from secular humanists to religious fundamentalists and everyone in between. And certainty is one of those themes. I know this to be true. I know that God loves me and hears my prayer, and there's a place for me in heaven. I know that God helps those who help themselves. That's often attributed to the Bible, but actually that's Benjamin Franklin. Or in a different vein altogether, I know that my thought creates my reality. My attitude is everything. What goes around comes around, and everything happens for a reason. Or in a different vein, I know there's no truth beyond science. There is no law beyond nature. There is no reality beyond this one. The fact is, using illustrations from the experiences of so many patients' lives, I could make a very good case for the truth or falsehood of any one of those statements of faith. Prove them or disprove them, if you will. But to what end? It's not a court case. I'm trying to explore what it is to be human. And to me, there's something fundamentally human in the way that we pursue and crave and take comfort in our certainty, only to sometimes miss the magic of its collapse. Javier, in his mid-30s, was a leukemia patient. He was the kind of a patient who, once I introduced myself as the chaplain, wanted to show off for me a little bit, spiritually speaking. He wanted to show me how spiritually solid he was. So he's showing me his Bible, and he's showing me the books he brought with him to the hospital and the music he was listening to, telling me about his church community. While he'd grown up in a large Latino Catholic family, as an adult, he found a deeper connection with a more evangelical Christian community. So he used a lot of language like, as the head of the house, I want to walk with the Lord, and I want to surround myself with the right kinds of people. Michael, my brother is just not right with the Lord, no matter what I say to him, and so I can't be around him. His faith was in his certainty. Still, I could hear a certain unease beneath his platitudes of certainty, and I asked him to tell me a little bit more about what he meant by the right kinds of people. and if he thought that Jesus might consider the same things. Well, that opened the conversation wide. And then we could really talk about his judgments of others, but much more importantly, his judgments toward himself. And finally, 45 minutes later, the truth came seeping out in his tears beneath his mask of certainty when he said, to tell you the truth, Michael, I don't think I'm going to make it. And I don't deserve this. Wow. It was like this enormous exhale after holding his breath for as long as humanly possible. And what was left was room to breathe in another kind of air that I would just as soon call grace, to be who he is, a scared human being with far more questions than answers. Deserving. It is such a loaded word, and yet it is inextricably linked to these other themes that I see come up again and again from folks all over the belief map. Closely linked to deserving is the idea that I'm special. I'm special, and therefore I'm entitled to good things, to health, success, wealth, whatever it is. Closely linked to being entitled, but in slight contrast, is the idea that good things have to be earned, that I first must prove myself worthy in order to have success, salvation, whatever it is. And now, while that idea might seem to be shot through the lens of a Protestant work ethic, that idea is also present in Eastern religion, in New Age thought, and certainly within American secular humanist tradition, in the way that we revere perceived self-made men and women. They earned it, by golly. Closely linked to earning is the idea that I have some power or control here over outcomes and circumstances. If I can do, be, say, pray, or eat the right thing, somehow I'm going to be okay, I'm going to be safe, I'm going to be healed. All of these beliefs are huddled under the same umbrella of belief that would even say there even is such a thing as a force for goodness and justice and fairness in the world. Cancer can rock any one of those statements of belief to the core. I am not attempting to articulate the most perfect or complete theology to say that all of these beliefs are correct or that I hold them myself, or it depends on the day that you ask me. I really mean to say that I don't think it has so much to do with what we believe as our relationship to it. How tightly do we hold on to it? Do we allow it to change? Do we allow it to change us? Because any one of those beliefs, yes, has the power to soothe and to bring calm, and it has an equal power to intensify our suffering when it turns out maybe not to be true or not big enough for this particular reality. Phyllis was the embodiment of I'm special and therefore entitled. It was the end of the day on a Friday. I was pretty pooped, ready to go home. But I saw there was one newly admitted patient whom I'd not met. So I thought, I'll just pop in, introduce myself, tell her I'll see her on Monday. I get my head in the door and I just say, hi, I'm Michael, I'm the chaplain. She cuts me right off right away and says, oh, the Lord has answered my prayers in sending you here to me today, chaplain. Please do come in and sit down. Oh, brother. Well, Phyllis's spiritual crisis had not so much to do with her diagnosis or prognosis so much as it had to do with her vocabulary. You see, on New Year's Day that year, she and her husband sat down to make a list of expectations they had of God. She felt uneasy with that word at first and said so, but her husband had assured her, look, honey, God has expectations of us and we can have expectations of God. So they made a list of health and wealth and all the rest. But now she wondered if she had offended God in using that word, and that's why she has leukemia. You see, Michael, my leukemia is 100% curable, so I think maybe God was just trying to get my attention, give me a little slap on the wrist. You know what I mean? I don't know, though. What if it's a punishment? What do you think? I want to go home, is what I think. She went on to tell me how God had given her cuts in line at the supermarket and found parking places for her right by the front door of an impossibly crowded Costco parking lot. Do you know what prayer I pray every day, Michael? I say, God, show me your favor today. I just hate wishy-washy prayers, don't you? Why should God show you his favor, I asked. Well, because I'm his precious child. What about the last person in line at the supermarket? Is he God's precious child? He might be, but God has his favorites. Jesus had his favorites. There's a hierarchy in heaven. It says so in the Bible, and I want to be at the top. There you have it. I'm special. Now, as much of a cartoon as Phyllis may seem to be, I assure you her suffering was quite real. And how many of us feel special? I do. Don't you? I'm a good guy. Look at what I do for a living, for crying out loud. I exercise, I eat right, I'm a good friend. What if none of us are special at all? Or what if we all are? That second theme that would say that good things have to be earned, it's also closely linked to the idea that it's never available now. It's over there, and you have to earn it. That somehow there's this place over there called health, success, love, and happiness. I'm going to work like a dog to get there. And when I get there, don't anybody move. Don't touch a thing. I'll be okay when, if I could just get through this chemo, if I just had $1,000, if that person would just love me back. So many faith systems, religious and secular alike, are based on this idea that it's not available here and now, it's over there, and you have to earn it. Ruth was this wonderfully wise, soulful older woman with deep roots in her Eastern European Jewish ancestry. She was watching the love of her life, her husband of 60-some years, slowly slip away over the course of many weeks in the hospital. Michael, she said, I thought I did life the right way. I married the man I loved, raised 3 beautiful children. We gave them wonderful educations. They now have beautiful families, successful careers of their own. We were always looking forward to our golden years. And now look, to tell you the truth, I'm going to be 86 years old and I'm still waiting for the party to begin. Myra was this great gal, mid-50s, pretty colorful past, not so wonderful absent husband, and a very thick Long Island accent. I liked her very much. After we got acquainted for a bit, I asked her if any kind of faith or spirituality were part of the equation for her. Oh, God, she said, well, I was raised a Catholic, but I don't know. Church, it was never my thing. I mean, I believe in God and all that, but church, I don't know. And then I got sick and I thought I should pray or something. But it seemed kind of hypocritical to go to God now, when I hadn't gone to God in all these years. You know what I'm saying? And then last week, Michael, I was across the street in the clinic getting my chemo, and there was this Latino man there praying up a storm with the pictures of the saints and the rosary beads all spread out. And I thought, I can't compete with that. As if there's only so much healing power, grace to go around, and she wasn't entitled to any, not to her share, because she hadn't done it the right way, hadn't earned it. Alex was a very tough young man, 28 years old, with this native street smarts kind of intelligence, very turbulent background, grew up in the Central Valley, a history with gangs, a brother in prison. He was a semi-pro bare-fisted boxer. I didn't even know there was such a thing. When I went in to introduce myself, the only personal artifact in his room was this tattered picture of himself all bloodied up in the boxing ring. I didn't recognize him. I said, who's that? He said, it's me. It's the only time I've ever lost a fight. Why would you want that picture up? I asked. I want to be sure it never happens again. Alex had this amazing capacity for reflection and philosophy. Yeah, Michael, I could pray to God to heal me, but why should he? Why me? Why not the guy down the hall? Why not the kids downstairs? Why not everybody in the hospital? Isn't prayer kind of judging God, saying things shouldn't be how they are? Maybe we're just supposed to accept. But then the champion in the ring let his voice be heard. Michael, you've watched hundreds of patients go through these bone marrow transplants. I want to be the best patient possible to ensure success. What's the best way to do that? Here's that other theme. I have some power or control here over circumstances, over outcomes. Now, I certainly don't mean to imply that we don't have power over how we experience our journey or the meaning that we make of it. But when it comes to the bigger questions of who gets sick, who doesn't, who dies, who doesn't, it's just out of our hands. And Alex did not want to accept that powerlessness. I think we all take great comfort in the illusion that we have some kind of power, and we pursue that even when a diagnosis of cancer might pull that rug of certainty right out from underneath our feet, causing a kind of earthquake in our world. Part of my role, I think, is to walk through the rubble of that earthquake with a patient, picking out, what is it I want to keep? What is it I need? What? I don't need that anymore. Maybe it's an old relationship, a job, or a belief system. And can we build with what we've saved a new house of understanding that be sturdy enough and large enough to contain this new reality, even if this reality means my imminent death? I think ultimately my chaplaincy is about creating a safe space for truth telling, for the possibility of the discovery of meaning, maybe even in the smallest, most inconsequential aspects of life, the little details. As Father Greg Boyle would say, establishing kinship with all of humanity on our common human journey, discovering our oneness and that we are not alone. When I told my mom about Ruth, that wonderfully wise older woman waiting for the party to begin, my mom, who was a pretty darn wonderfully wise person herself, knowingly said, "Oh, honey, the party is always right now." And so it is. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Chaplain, for really a beautiful and moving talk. I think you highlight the most critical aspect of the care we provide, which is how do we nurture spirit and how do we acknowledge spirit? You spoke so eloquently and beautifully about the stories that you shared. Can you give us some guidance as healthcare providers and professionals on how we in a non-chaplain role might begin to address the question of spirit and faith in a medical visit?
Thank you so much for the question. I realize on the medical side of things, it's a little trickier because the clock is always ticking. I don't have such a clock that I can take the time. So I know you've got your checklist of information to get, and I don't want to hear this story about your mother or how you're feeling today. I need to know if you want this surgery or not. If there's a way to just take a breath and question, why is this patient telling me this story and why now? Might there be a hidden meaning in it? Is there something she's trying or he's trying to reveal to me? Being a human being first. I know that there's a kind of a cardinal rule that we keep this wall of professionalism and keep this distance. I don't subscribe to that philosophy. I remember once in the hospital, there was an oncologist whom I had heard about, but I had never met. And I went in to introduce myself to the patient, and I saw a white coat sitting on the bed with her back to me. My judgment, perceptions, bias said, oh, this must be a social worker or something. Oh, no, this is the doctor sitting on the bed, touching the patient's hand. It doesn't take any more time. And I've seen studies that if you sit down with a patient and spend the precise same amount of time that you do standing up, the patient experiences it as more time to just sit down. I don't think you have to necessarily talk. I've talked to doctors who said, oh, they don't need a chaplain because they're not religious, or this has so much not to do with religion, but has to do with where a patient finds meaning and where they are in this moment. And maybe they need this time to tell me this story. And if I don't have the time to listen, I'm going to find somebody who does.
Thank you. I have to say our Q&A is just full of glowing comments, thanking you for your leadership and your perspective and all that you do for your patients. You really hit the heart of integrative medicine and whole health approach, which is really what matters to you. So thank you for leading on this. And with that, we will close our morning session. Thank you all for joining and being so engaged as an audience. We really appreciate it. We will be back at 1:30. With a mindfulness session. You are welcome to stay signed on to the Zoom. We will have our exhibitor slides presented at that time, but we welcome you all back at 1:30. And with that, thank you, and we will see you in about an hour.